Austin, I'd like to thank you for allowing us into your homes for this fourth edition of Season 5 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And I would like to start by making a couple of quick announcements. The first one I would like to make is that I would like to thank everyone that attended the metaphysical philosophical meeting that we here at Esoteric Science Roundtable and Jeff Contreras from Therefore I Am co-host each and every third Wednesday of the month at Spider House. And we had a pretty good turnout. We had close to 30 folks show up, and I am quite appreciative to everyone that made the time to come out and break bread with us. The second announcement I want to make quickly, there is a conference taking place at the Austin Convention Center this weekend. It is the World Wellness Weekend, and there is one of the people that is going to have a booth there is a future guest of the show, Dr. Elizabeth Carmen, and I wanted to mention that she will be having a booth there, booth number 27, this weekend at the the World Wellness Weekend here at the Austin Convention Center. And it's pretty much an all-day event. I think it's pretty much from about 9 to 6, somewhere like that. So if anybody has any interest in getting more information about that, again, it's this weekend. So I'm going to go ahead and begin with the show proper. I would like to thank my guest, Swami. This is Swami Nada Brahmananda. And I had the pleasure of meeting Swami recently. He also has a website that you folks can check out and get more information about his story and his travels and his mission, if you will. And so, Swami, if you could begin, first of all, thank you very much for coming on the show. I do appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Certainly. And if you could just give a bit of a brief background on your humble beginnings into your spiritual journey. And I understand that you do have a scientific background. And if you could please just speak from that perspective and give us a little bit of an inkling into what led you from that life into where you are now.
As you can tell from my accent, I was born in England and grew up in England, and was married in my 20s, and I had absolutely no interest in spiritual things whatsoever, your classical Anglican, if you like. Certainly, we grew up with no religious stress in our family. And my attitude in those days was everybody who was spiritual was kind of left of center, but as long as they left me alone, I was happy to leave them alone. My attitude really came from a belief that I had had no experiences to make me think otherwise. And I was very down to earth. I was programming computers when they had vacuum tubes. That dates me. And so I grew up with computers and know them pretty well. Electronics was my hobby. Physics was what I was studying at college, and so on and so forth, and mathematics. So everything made sense to me in my little world. And I was actually living in a haunted house in England and didn't know it. The master bedroom was always cold and so on, and the smell of roses occurred in the middle of winter and all kinds of stuff. And that's another story, perhaps, for another time. But that really happened, and the story of how we sent what's called a lost soul, away from this world and into essentially his next life, can be told some other time. But I came to North America in 1971, and met a man who told me about traveling out of the body. And my little scientific mind clicked in and said, are you telling me that I can get out of my body and get back again without dying? And he said, yes, that's what this book is all about. And of course the book was the one that Robert Monroe wrote, called Journeys Out of the Body. I recommend it to everybody. And so I practiced the techniques in it, realizing that even if it worked, I wouldn't be able to prove it to anybody else, probably, but I would have some sort of proof myself. And so I did it, and 3 months later, it actually worked. And I realized when I came out of that experience, oh my God, there is another reality. I have to look into this. And so that's how it started in 1971.
And you did set out with maybe more of a scientific approach into wanting to investigate those mysteries. Yes. At that point?
I still think that way.
I would imagine.
That to me, the only thing that matters is direct experience. Books, theories, discussions, conventions, whatever, conferences. It's a lot of theory which hasn't been proved to you unless you've had the experience. And if you have an experience, you can't deny it. You can misinterpret it, but you can't deny it.
Good point.
And so it's a good starting point. And of course we can get into stuff, as to where that leads you if you take that approach. There are many spiritual paths, as you know.
Certainly.
And some of them are very long-winded and will clearly take many lifetimes. Others are extremely short, especially one is extremely short and will take you directly to the satisfaction, if you like, of your reason for being here. And the funny thing is, it is extremely simple. And so the funny thing is, it takes you 30 years of investigating other organizations and many ways of doing things to get to this sudden realization of how simple it really is. And then you go, okay, dump the other stuff, and so on. So my attitude still is science. As the title says, World Peace Pilgrim was a name I adopted when I started a walk for world peace around North America. It's meant to be a big square, kind of following the coastline wherever I can, because I love the ocean. Following the idea of the original World Peace Pilgrim, who's a woman, an American woman who spent 28 years doing something like this. And my goals are slightly different from hers, but the idea is the same. But you know what? Although one walks for peace, I think that the walker in the end is the major beneficiary.
I would assume so, sure.
If you want to know if there's a God or something greater than ourselves, just go for a very long walk alone, and just let God, or whatever you want to call this greater presence, look after you. And the minute you do that, the minute you put your total life in the hands of this greater being, whatever, suddenly you're looked after. It's funny. It's rather like, I know people like to separate God from themselves, or God's up there somewhere and I'm down here,
right.
which is incorrect. But if you're just talking along those lines, it's as though, God goes, oh, well, if you're given 100% of your life to me, I guess I better look after you. Because you start getting help all over the place, the slightest thought, in fact, of needing something, and it was provided for me. I've been doing this for over 7 years now, which is nothing compared with the 28 years of the original Peace Pilgrim. But you end up meeting something that you might call God. I began to see, after 2 weeks of doing this, I began to see the divine in the eyes of every person and creature I met. And it became a major celebration just to be doing it. Sleeping under bushes, whatever, it didn't matter.
All right, so you certainly would have a chance to get to know yourself, man, know thyself, as the Greek axiom goes,
Yes.
And then certainly get to know yourself reflected in others, as you were saying, finding the divinity within others, and that's a wonderful, wonderful realization to come to, certainly.
It came at the end of 30 years of, trying this organization, trying that system
That's
of
a good
philosophy.
point to bring up as well. Oftentimes, many people will go through many different organizations in their spiritual quest, and they'll outgrow one or move on from another, or they'll feel dissatisfied, and so they're on a constant, path, and they're constantly changing the guidance that they're seeking. And so I think, as you said earlier, that ultimately it seems as though all paths lead to a path of self-understanding that pretty much has to be taken by ourselves. And you spoke about that earlier, about the path, the lonely aspect of a spiritual path, and certainly there is that factor. But I think, from my perspective, if you really are on a spiritual path and you really are taking in that essence of spirituality, you never will really feel alone, because you'll know that you're not alone. You'll know that you are a segment or a part of all other things. And so wherever you are, you're amongst yourself. And so that's something difficult for people to grasp all the time and keep at the forefront of their consciousness, but nonetheless, that is the truth of our reality.
Yeah, if people would like to read more details of my experiences and my travels, I have a diary at my website, and you can just go there, to swami-g.com, and click on diary, and you can see there what's been going on. I'm a little out of date, like a year, but for instance, I have nearly quit this walk 4 times. It's a walk for peace, although I haven't walked recently, because I decided to accept rides when people stopped and asked me if I'd like one. because that was the way to meet people. And that has worked out okay too.
And one thing as well, one interjection, that allowing that trust factor also is part of, I think, a very large component of the spiritual path, and allowing yourself to trust yourself and trust others. And so by, allowing yourself to go on these rides and kind of allow the journey to unfold, as it were, that element of trust is something that has to be internalized and really ingrained and really lived by in order to really fully take in, the full effect of this spiritual path.
Well, this is why there's a very big difference between a pilgrimage undertaken alone, supposedly alone, compared with one with other people, where there's all this kind of chatter and discussions and problems and how do we get food and da-da-da-da-da. When you're on your own, you don't worry about food. You don't worry about, you do worry a little bit about making sure you've got something to drink. But you're not distracted. You have time to stop and look at the beautiful wild flowers in Texas, for instance. If you're just walking down like Highway 209, there's lots of beautiful little wild flowers that I'm sure nobody sees.
No, when you're zipping along at 70 miles an hour, you don't really get to take in the flora and the fauna.
No. And if you're walking, you get the fun of seeing the cops stopping people for speeding all over the place. And you even get to know the cops a little. And talking about the police have always been very, very kind to me. For instance, in, Colorado, I was in the countryside east of Colorado Springs, and I realized I was really off the beaten path. This is about 2 years ago, no, a year and a half ago. And walking down a country road, I'd been walking all day in the heat, and about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a police car pulls up, driven by a large black man, and he was very polite, and, do you have any ID? And so I said, sure, and I took off my backpack and showed him the ID, told him what I was doing, and he checked, not for the first time, he handed me back my ID and said, you're clean, and so I always like to say, I'm happy to know that, and then I asked him, can you please tell the other policemen in the area what I'm doing so that not everyone feels he has to stop and check me out. And he said, that's already been done.
Wonderful.
And then he made a U-turn, and as he was driving away, he said, God bless you. And I said, God bless you too. And then as I walked down the street, I thought, how many people have been blessed by the police? And he meant it. He was serious.
That's wonderful.
And
I think that's another thing too. Your earnest attitude towards a spiritual path or approach is going to be a magnetic calling to other people, and they're going to be able to respond at some level if they can understand that at some level. If they're understanding a kernel of that within themselves, then they can recognize it in other people and hopefully treat them accordingly.
Yes. To me, one of the outcomes of my 7-year walk so far is that I now see the human race as totally magnificent. We are incredible. Of course, sometimes we're magnificently stupid, but nevertheless we are incredible. And the beauty in people shines through if you give it a chance, And one other thing to say too is, if you undertake something like this kind of pilgrimage, which is extremely rare in North America, although it's more common the further east you go, if anybody's faking it, they won't last long.
I would imagine so. Good point.
Mother Nature will just take you out.
Right. So as the world peace pilgrim, the concept of world peace is thrown out often, and we are asked to visualize world peace often.
Right.
And sometimes we're reminded that the injunction, let there be peace and let it begin with me, is often thrown about there quite often as well. And so I'm curious, what is your interpretation or your vision of world peace, and is it actually something that is possible in maybe, let's say, our lifetime?
Well, the original peace pilgrim,
Yes.
the lady, she was right on the ball, I think, when she said that if you establish peace inside everybody individually, you will end up with world peace. But you can't do it the other way, Otherwise, you end up with a Pax Romana, Peace, or we'll come and fix it, with our soldiers. Of course, that kind of peace does work, It worked in Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, while the Russians were enforcing that peace. But the minute the Russians pulled their muscles out of those countries, we saw what happened: racial cleansing, and terrible war, which was just waiting to break out. So the Pax Romana or the Pax Americana or whatever you want to call it is only temporary. It's not a long-term solution. The long-term solution, I believe, is for the whole human race to begin to see itself as one family. I really, really believe this. I mean, what started things for me was in the late 70s. I had a vision in my meditation, and this vision was started by my being out of my body. I just suddenly became aware I was out of my body, and I was in space looking at our beautiful planet, and around our planet was that most gorgeous blue. You know the blue you sometimes see in meditation, which is more iridescent than a physical blue? It's an utterly beautiful blue. Well, our whole planet was surrounded by this blue, and I was curious about what was causing this, and I zoomed in on the image, and it resolved into thousands of little blue lines crisscrossing, joining points of light. And guess what was at the point of each point of light? A group of people meditating for peace.
Wow.
And so I thought, wow, this is thousands and thousands of groups around the world doing this as a matter of course, continuously. And I realized as I came out of it that
there's a blue aura we were speaking of just now.
Look at the beautiful blue behind us. And I realized that this was in the future. I personally believe that the people in the world who do meditate back in the 70s and 80s had a large hand in the breaking down of the Berlin Wall, for instance, and that the fact that the USSR crumbled without a shot being fired. I mean, that blew everybody away when it happened. We couldn't believe it. What's this? No war? I grew up in a time, for instance, when in England we were 4 minutes away from the Third World War. So unlike in America, we didn't have time to build atom bomb shelters. We didn't have time to reach them. But we were nevertheless aware that it could happen any time. So we grew up in this constant fear. And when the USSR collapsed, I thought it was a wonderful opportunity for us in the West who were more prosperous to help the new Russia to rescue themselves and to find prosperity and to live more happy lives. And I have a feeling that we could have done better than we did.
Certainly.
But it's like 9/11 too. I was in California when that happened. And my first thought after I saw the Twin Towers come down and I realized this was terrorist, I realized that here was a perfect opportunity for the world to come together at the UN or something, because every country's got at least one airline and a whole bunch of high-risers. And so surely we can relate to that together, can't we? And I thought this is a perfect opportunity. The door had opened for some approach towards world peace in the future. And unfortunately, as we all know, that's not what happened. What happened was the knee-jerk reaction of let's go and blow them away. So to me, eventually all borders must come down. All people must see each other as brothers and sisters. But we are responsible for, our brother and sister in the world, and that the most prosperous. Think about the United States, right? The United States is prosperous because those states are united, and it becomes an enormous market. And it would be unthinkable, for instance, for Texas to decide to go to war with Arizona because they don't like something about Arizona, right? Washington would stop it, and rightly so. And so if we had that same sort of cooperation around the world with understanding of each other's cultures like they're beginning to do in Europe, I think that we would have a much greater spirituality. We are, after all, spiritual beings in a physical body, not the other way around.
Certainly.
So that, to my belief here is that I'm doing this walk for peace because I know that when you meditate and you project an image of a world in peace, that image goes up to the astral planes and comes back down again. And this is one way, for instance, where each individual person can actually do something for world peace without getting involved in politics or anything. there will be an unseen force, if you like, urging the minds of the world's leaders to be more considerate towards each other and so on. So this is part of an attempt to get people to have meditation groups in their homes. Once a week, meditate for peace together, and just allow that thing to happen. This is not something that I'm going to lead or anything. I don't believe this needs a leader.
No,
I think it's better if it's
it's an organic upcropping.
The whole thing. The people. It's a realization that the people simply say, "This will give us a better world. Let's do it, and let's keep it that way." Of course, the other alternative that President Reagan mentioned, as we all know probably, is that if there's a threat from outer space, that'll bring us together very quickly.
Certainly.
But that's not the best solution.
No, I
don't think so.
No.
Somebody once asked the Dalai Lama, if you had a message to give the world, what would it be? And it was such a short message, 5 words: be kind to each other.
Wow. Simple but profound. And again, it does.
Very deep.
Yeah. It seems like even the most complex teachings ultimately do break down to a very simplistic message ultimately, and that is something that we need to keep in mind, firmly in mind. So in order to achieve some sort of a world peace, you think it would be helpful for us to begin to think of ourselves as one humanity, and perhaps as it says biblically, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. And so if we change our hearts, the more numbers of people that change their hearts collectively, we add and add and add, and this becomes an exponential, overwhelming energy that, yes, I think this blue condition that you're speaking of, and just a quick aside, sometimes that blue aura is sometimes referred to as an orgone, Wilhelm Reich's work, as an orgone glow, so to speak, or that's the life energy underlying or surrounding the planet. And it's also next to the aura of the planet. So that's certainly one consideration of that interpretation that you had.
Yeah, well, one of the things I've been trying to do is to get people to meditate together. Here in Austin, I have a little group now that meditates for peace each week, and also spends another evening doing vichara, or spiritual inquiry, which is like the intellectual study of the spiritual path.
Are you interested in asking other folks here locally that are wanting to participate?
They're welcome to, yeah. They can contact me through the website if they want.
Okay.
Which is probably the easiest way, because I'll answer with email and give them phone numbers and what have you.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, like on Saturdays we meditate all day.
All day?
All day.
Wow.
Together.
So you do have to commit yourself.
Yeah, most people think they're meditating when they're doing this 5-minute thing in church.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get much in 5 minutes if you think about it.
Well, I would say with meditation, it's kind of like weightlifting or exercise or diet. You can't just do it one time and expect to get a lot of results. It's a cumulative process. It has to build in and build in and build in, and then after time, you'll see the results as a end result.
Yeah. So, for instance, I mean, I can push something here if you like, a little idea. On March the 4th, at the Unity Church on Dessau Road, in the afternoon, I'm giving a talk on my pilgrimage, and spiritual ideas for people who'd like to come, and it's free.
And so March 4th is going to be Sunday, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it's a Sunday, and it's from 1:30 to 3:30, and people can just come, and listen and hang out and ask questions and whatever they want to do.
And there's no charge for that event?
Oh, no. It's by donation if they want to, and the money will go to the church. But it's really, there's no requirement for that.
Wonderful.
If people want classes or past life regression workshops, things like that, that's the opportunity for them to say, let's do that, and I'll do it.
I understand. Wonderful. And so then, moving to the concept of inner peace, how would you recommend, what are some of your ideas or suggestions for stilling yourself and having this inner peace in relation to this larger concept of world peace?
Well, world peace is an external thing, but it's a manifestation of an internal state. Like Pilgrim said, really inner peace leads to outer peace. Inner peace it's not something I don't think that you can directly work towards. Indirectly you work towards it by years of study of various spiritual ideas, and slowly but surely your attitude towards this reality begins to change. I'm not saying, for instance, that there's not something here, right? that, and it does appear to look like a table in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
But any physicist will tell you this is essentially empty space.
True, indeed.
It's just an energy field.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rosicrucians that I was a member of for 15 years, will tell you that the only reality really is energy in movement. There is nothing else that's in this reality.
Mm-hmm.
I would go one stage further and say that energy is actually consciousness.
Or thought, certainly.
No, consciousness itself.
Mm.
In Patanjali's yoga, there's this famous first verse, Ata Yoganu Shasanam Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means, now we're going to talk about yoga. Yoga consists of the stopping of the mind. In other words, when you're not thinking,
Mm-hmm.
there is no mind. You could argue when you're not thinking, Corey's not even there. But what is there is conscious awareness, which is something much more interesting. So that, when you talk about I, me,
Mm-hmm.
you're just thinking of a name, a label,
Mm-hmm.
which is sitting in your memories. If I were to be able to take your memories away, shall we say for a couple of minutes? So you have no memories of anything, but you can still speak English. And I said to you something like, I think you're the most handsome or most beautiful woman that I've ever met, or handsome man I've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd have probably a smile from one ear to the other, right? And if I then turned around and, no, you wouldn't actually, because I've taken your memories away. And then I would say, oh, no, I've changed my mind. I think you're the most ugly person I've ever met in my life. What would you say to me? Probably, what does ugly mean?
Mm.
How, there's no conditioned response.
Mm-hmm.
So we learn to suffer.
True.
From childhood, we learn how to suffer.
Good point.
We do it to ourselves. So inner peace, for instance, is a product, I think, a byproduct of the spiritual path itself. What comes with years of study,
Mm-hmm.
backed up by experience in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have any experiences, I would suggest to you, you do not know anything. It's all secondhand unless you experience it yourself. And it might be true for the other guy or for the author of the book you read,
Mm-hmm.
but it may be not true for you.
Good point.
So the only thing you can rely on is what you experience. So, you read books, for instance, about time not being real,
Mm-hmm.
space not being real.
Mm-hmm.
But until you've actually had the experience in meditation, and I can assure you can do it because I've done it, is to find yourself outside space and time altogether. Even beyond the so-called astral planes where all, the dead people can be found while they're waiting to reincarnate or what have you. Any hells that people may have invented with their minds. And that goes for heavens too. Beyond all that, outside space and time, so there's no images except one. There's an absolute silence that you wouldn't believe. It's so profound. And that to me is the peace that passeth all understanding. It's around us and in us, but if we don't prepare ourselves to experience it, we will never know that it's there. When you've had that experience and you come back, and this happened to me the first time in the mid to late 70s, I came back in my little apartment, back to my body sort of thing, or to this consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and I went, oh my God, I've just been, something that I still think of as me, as having an identity, was outside time and space. The implications of that scientifically are enormous. For one thing, it meant that I was never born, can't die, and was always eternal. Because if you can be outside time once, automatically you're eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that I experienced the proof of what you find in these very old spiritual books in the Far East, that are thousands of years old, with these masters all saying, you are not what you think you are,
Mm-hmm.
Or saying things like Tattvamasi, you are that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then you have to learn what do they mean by that.
Certainly.
When they say this in India, they mean this, this reality here. When they say that, what they are referring to is there's something that supports all this, that's underneath,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is much more like consciousness itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so they mean that when they say you are that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way they're saying you are God, but the problem I have with the word God
Yes.
is that it's got as many interpretations as it has grains of sand on the beach. And there's no point in arguing about it.
There's more than 72, as the Hebrews tell us. But,
so I tend not to get into religious discussions. The way to stop them, for instance, is so easy. If somebody starts a discussion and uses the word God, you simply say, can we stop here? And let's define what we mean by this word God before we go on. And the discussion dies right there. Because they've never thought about it. Or they'll quote scripture at you, which is only good for their particular book.
That's a good point as well.
And so the bottom line is the mystical one, which is experience the truth of things for yourself, and then you'll know. And that old saying is so true. Those who know say very little, and those who don't know say a lot.
I found that in my experience as well. Yeah. So I would like to go from that point, if you would join me here, and if we can discuss synchronicities and the concept of being at the right place at the right time, and also understanding these synchronicities, recognizing them, and then also getting to a point of continuity of consciousness where these synchronicities, these serendipities are the norm, not the exception, and we're aware of so many interconnections with our fellow man and life in general.
Well, the word synchronicity, as far as I know, was coined by Carl Jung.
Yes.
And of course, he pretty much is the ground zero when it comes to dream analysis. I believe that those who are intellectually inclined on their spiritual paths should learn how to interpret their own dreams. And of course, there are workshops available on this. I give one myself. From the spiritual point of view, so that you begin to understand that there's no such thing as a meaningless dream, and that you're a spiritual being having a human experience. The more you understand about what goes on while you are asleep, quote unquote, the better you are. And as you go along your spiritual path, these synchronicities are simply noticed. They were always there. And one day what will happen is, at least it happened to me, I had come back from India in 1983, and I was living in a shed in the backyard of a friend's place. It was my
Did he know you were there? No, just kidding.
She was an old friend, and she did know I was there. We had a deal, so I built her swimming pool and sort of, snow plowed out the snow and stuff. And it was like a one-man monastery. It was 6 feet by 6 feet. I could just lie down, but it was winterized. And I'd been in there for a number of years, and one morning I sat up and I realized I was happy. And I thought, wait a minute, how did that happen, Well, it creeps up on you. 15 years of spiritual practice, and there will be benefits. For instance, the idea of reincarnation is accepted by many people, but they really don't know why. They haven't had much proof of it. You can have proofs by meditating on your past lives. You'll get flashes of stuff there, and you will also find some of your dreams are flashes from past lives. So that's a whole subject in its own right, but it's just a little section, I think, of the intellectual study of the spiritual path. And from this comes a slow change over the years to you, to the way you think, and you begin to look at the world differently. For instance, I see the police as my friends and as my protectors, and I'm just real happy they're there while I'm walking down the road.
Well, certainly, if you start to think of law enforcement as an adversary, then they're going to set themselves up as an adversary towards you.
Oh, I don't blame them. I think it's a very, very hard job.
No doubt, no doubt.
I'm not too sure I would be good enough, to be a policeman.
Well, at least you're clean.
I hope so. So I think, you were talking about inner peace. I think it grows in you, because with happiness comes this peace inside you. They come together. Now, I don't mean happiness, where you go out with some friends and party and you say, oh, I was so happy tonight. I don't mean that kind of happiness. To me, happiness is this inner state, which once it's established, it is permanent. It doesn't matter what happens to the physical body, that happiness will not be touched.
And I would say it's contagious as well, as we were speaking earlier. The magnetic component of that is very contagious, and you can't help but notice when someone has that inner stillness, that inner peace, that they are able to maintain and keep as a relatively consistent aspect of their lives.
Yeah, I've been accused of being happy by a few people actually on my travels. They'll suddenly just say, "You're happy, aren't you? What's that about?" You know, and it's true. Partly because I've let go, you know, and let God, so to speak.
Certainly, certainly.
Synchronicity, for instance, where things happen just at the right moment, or in Jung's terms, of course, where you will dream of the future and then actually have it happen. That's what he meant by synchronicity. But for instance, I like I said before, I have nearly quit my pilgrimage 4 times so far. And the first time was in Southern California. I had been walking for 4 days across a small mountain range between the freeways on the east side of these mountains, the south of San Bruno, for instance, San Mateo, south of there, and I was heading for Half Moon Bay, for those people who know California. I wanted the ocean, you know, and I'd run out of food, I'd run out of water, it was beginning to rain, I was miserable as hell, and I finally got there, and it started to rain. And I was walking down the road, I wasn't even near the ocean, it was a mile away. The road was inland at that point, this is Route 1. And I was beginning to think, well, maybe I should, you know, maybe this is all I'm supposed to do, you know, it's just the West Coast, instead of the big square, you know. Maybe I'm supposed to do the other parts some other time. And I mentally sent a message to God and said, please, Lord, if I am supposed to continue this pilgrimage, can you please send me a sign? Really, you know, I was very serious. And literally now, for those people who've lived in Southern California, you know that nobody gets picked up by cars ever. Right?
I can attest to that. Yeah, I lived there for 5 years.
Paranoid about
True.
You know, giving people rides.
Absolutely.
Anyway, 1 minute later, a voice alongside me says, "Do you need a ride?" And I looked at this guy, you know, and I said, "Well, yes, it would be nice to get out of the rain and stuff." He says, "Sure." So I jumped in his car, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I would like to go and walk on the beach for a little while, you know, touch the ocean and things like that. And then after that, doesn't matter so much." And so he said, "I was just doing that this morning." He said, "I had a nervous breakdown." Guess what? He was working in computers in Silicon Valley, you know, and of course that was my career in the past. And we agreed not to talk about computers. And I said to him, "Why did you stop?" You know? And he said, "Well, I was driving along and I saw you walking along and something told me that I ought to offer you a ride." And he said, "Don't worry about it." I said, I sent a message up to the divine and I said, "Is it okay to pick up this guy?" And the answer was yes. This guy then took me inland, right? We stopped for a little meditation walk somewhere and he drove and drove and drove in the now pouring rain. And I had walked for 4 days, right, going east. Now, for those who know Southern California, right, I'd walked from San Mateo, going east to the coast. And we were driving, going west to the coast. And we were driving east. And I said to him, "Where do you live?" He said, "You can spend the night at my place if you like." You know, I said, "Thank you." You know, because I hadn't had a shower for 4 days. And he said, "I live in Palo Alto," which is only just slightly south of where I started 4 days before. You know, I could recognize the trains and everything, the same sound. And I laughed. I thought, well, that's okay. That was yesterday, you know. And that's just one story. There are many on my website, which actually is book length now. There's 34 chapters. So you end up knowing. There is this. I have met also 1 or 2 other people who have walked for various reasons, and they all have the same story, that they are looked after. You know. Now we don't have a tradition in North America of people walking around on pilgrimages, right? In India, there's lots of them. They're all Swamis, most of them.
Yes.
And they're wonderful souls, some of them that I met. So synchronicity to me is part of life. It's just that it becomes obvious when you get rid of all the ordinary day-to-day needs. You're not paying attention to them anymore. And it's like this phrase, let go and let God, you know. And for people, for instance, who are thinking about the spiritual path, but who are also strongly religious, my attitude there is it is very good to use your religion as a starting point. If you don't have any religion, it is still okay, as long as you're searching for truth. The truth, for instance, the best definition of truth I ever came across, most people can't define it if you ask them, was in a yoga text. Truth is that which does not change.
That's a great
over
definition.
time, period. It's always the same. And if you're looking for truth, God really doesn't move in mysterious ways, really. God moves in very predictable ways once you learn about some of the divine laws, not the ones that we already know about in physics and chemistry, but the ones which are not so easily seen, such as karma, laws like that. When you find out what those laws are, and you begin to live within their constraints, life becomes a joy.
Yes, absolutely.
And everybody becomes, your beloved brother and sister. And I'll tell you something. When you begin to think about that, and just, in a moment of quietness, about other people in this light, you end up with tears pouring down your face, tears of joy. And it's impossible to stop it. So I think what we do is we tend to close the door. We bottle ourselves in, and there's a barrier between us and the rest of the world. And we live behind this barrier. And in the process, I think we miss life itself. So, yes, synchronicity is everywhere. Most of the time we don't notice it. But whenever I have needed anything, it just manifested. And I think, for people who are Christians or Jews, for instance, the very best instruction you can find in the world is already there in the Bible. The Bible is full of stories that I don't think you can get very much from in terms of techniques. But this statement, be still and know that I am. Of course they put God on the end, but you really don't need that word. You can drop it off. And in fact, I've come up with another saying too, which I think is for the mystic, for the person who's searching actively for truth, is perhaps a little better. Be still and know thyself, with a capital S. As you referred to earlier, right? Know thyself, coming from ancient Greece, was written over the entrance to an ashram established by Pythagoras, of all people, right? Who was a mystic. They all wore white clothes, they were all vegetarians. And he got his training from the Egyptian mystery school. So, there's nothing really new in the world. We're rediscovering constantly, the same thing. What I would like, the second reason for my being on this walk was to see if I could establish pilgrimage trails for people to go on instead of going to Club Med for a week or two. Go on a pilgrimage trail, go visit, interesting spiritual places, maybe end up at a beautiful monastery, and take that as your vacation. And there's a little interest in that, but not yet. It's slow to get off the ground. But the third goal, I never expected. Just before I left, just before I began this pilgrimage, by entering Washington State from Canada on the West Coast, this thought came to me that by putting myself in harm's way, so-called, I should reaffirm the basic goodness and kindness and generosity in people, and that it was okay to have a good day. And I thought this was a silly goal, I thought this is nonsense, But I hadn't been into the United States for many years. I used to go skiing in the 70s, right, in Vermont. But I hadn't been into the United States for years. And when I got into the United States and started traveling, I began to realize that number 3 goal was perhaps number 1. I kept meeting people who were afraid. The United States appears to be afraid, living on fear.
It's very true.
And
very true.
It wasn't like that. Even during the Vietnam War, it wasn't like that. 30 years of really bad television, scaring the living daylights out of people.
There's a lot of truth to that,
has
absolutely.
produced the way we're living now.
No question, no question.
And so there are brave souls out there, picking up people on the road and so on. But there are many stories I can tell you, but it's better to just read the website.
Well, actually, we do have some calls lined up, and so I would like to allow the viewing public to ask you some questions if they'd like. And also, you are pretty well versed in dream interpretation. So if folks out there have some questions about some dreams that have been plaguing you lately, you're certainly welcome to call and ask the Swami if he can enlighten you a bit relating to any of your dreams that you'd like to have interpreted. So let's try a call. Hello, caller, you on the air? Hello?
Corey?
Yeah?
Swami?
Hello.
Thank you for, Corey, thank you for having the Swami on here. And thank you for talking about the gifts and graces, because that's what the Catholics talk about when you're walking the path of the righteous. And then gifts and graces come down, and it goes with that synchronicity. I've been meditating since 1968, the transcendental meditation, where I imagine the earth that I walk on, imagine the water, imagine the air, and imagine the fire. Well, I'm walking the path, or sometimes I'm meditating on a rock in the river, but recently I've been all four people watching each other meditate, as if I'm on the banks of the river, watching myself meditate on the rock in a river. And I'm also on a cliff watching myself meditate on the river, on the path. So I've split myself four ways. And it's a bit, not confusing, but it's different, let's say. It's almost schizophrenic. And I was wondering, Swami, have you ever done that before?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Some of the experiences that we are given come from the inner self. They are scheduled. It's not due to anything that you did particularly. Sometimes it's a gift from the work you did on yourself in previous lives. In this case, you were being shown that you actually can be living more than one life at the same time, in several bodies, in different places on the world.
Right.
I've had that experience where I've been out of the body and I thought about getting back to the body, and I realized I had two to go back to and I wasn't sure which one. That resolved itself by my just deciding to move one of my physical fingers. But I got a glimpse of the other person who is also me somewhere in the world. Now there is another, even more important experience, though, that this might be too, since you mentioned you were on a cliff or something higher up.
Yes.
There is a situation where, when you're meditating, you can suddenly find yourself behind an image of yourself, which may not even be looking at you,
Right.
that doesn't know that you're behind it. A higher version of yourself is watching you, but you never think to turn around to look at it. And that's not just one version of you, there can be three or more. But it's really all you. The way I like to handle this is to say, imagine an upside down pyramid, okay? And the tip of the pyramid is just in the ocean, okay? And that's you.
Mm-hmm.
But the tip of the pyramid is the conscious part of you that's functioning in this world, because it's dipped in the ocean. But when you meditate, your consciousness begins to expand up that pyramid, and you merge with greater and greater parts of yourself. When you get to the very top, of course, you notice that all the pyramids, the bottoms of the pyramids, are all connected. Right? There is one great divine consciousness there, which you always were part of and still are, and cannot be denied. You cannot be separated from the divine. You are divine. By the way, you don't need fixing. There's nothing wrong with you. Your soul is pristine and perfect, and doesn't need saving from anything.
Right. For me, it's just unexplored territory.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Don't worry about it too much. You can use Carl Jung's suggestions. For instance, if it came in what seemed to be a dream, you can give yourself the suggestion before going to sleep that you are going to have a dream during the night, which will give you more information about the symbology of that experience.
Yes.
And that you will remember this dream in the morning.
Oh, yes.
Okay? One of the tricks to remembering dreams is you can take a glass of water at night, drink half of it, saying to yourself, when I drink the other half tomorrow morning, I will remember my dreams.
I've done dream journals for 3 years.
Good.
And unless people do dream journals, they don't really know what goes on in their sleep. And until they do dream journals, they really don't know what the consciousness and the subconscious is capable of.
Oh no!
And it's a wonderful thing. And what we were taught is to imagine writing on a piece of paper our dreams before we go to bed. Put the paper and pencil on the table,
yes.
so that when you wake up, you automatically write that dream down in a few words, because it only takes a couple of seconds,
True.
and you lose it.
But you know also that there's more than you can do than that. If you keep your eyes closed when you're waking up, and you don't move the body, and go over the last dream you remember 3 times,
Right.
give it a title, and then go to the dream before it,
Right.
and do the same thing, give it a title, and the one before that. The most I've ever gone back is 4. Because the 4th dream, by the time you get to the 4th dream, you know, you're beginning to lose things.
Right.
And so all you need to do is remember the titles, and then open your eyes with 4 titles in your head and quickly write them down.
Right.
Right?
Oh,
and then
oh,
you
yeah.
can go into the details. And as you know, don't try and interpret the dream
Right.
until you finish writing it down.
Right.
And then when you finish writing all the dreams down, then begin the interpretation. Remember also that if you hear a song or a mantra,
Yeah.
or a poem or something it's a gift to you. It's a spiritual gift. And write the words down if somebody says anything to you. They are really important. These are gifts coming from the inner self.
Right.
There's nothing random about this.
Oh, it's beautiful. What I used to do is try to, in my dream state when I was in dreamland, is look at my hand and become cognizant.
Right.
Excellent.
And 2, I would try to carry on a dream that I had the night before,
Yes.
and carry on the dream the next
Those
day.
are also methods to let you
Yeah.
become lucid as well.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
I was going to say that. It's a well-known technique. Actually, what I like to do is look at my feet
Okay.
and the shoes, because if it's a past life experience that you're dreaming, the shoes and will cause you to say, oh, and you look around at the archaeology of the buildings and the clothes that people are wearing, and if they're all period, then it's almost certainly a past life experience. But like Corey said, it's a well-known technique to say, am I dreaming? Oh yes, oh my God, I am. On the other hand, this is tremendous fun, but if you want to do this, please remember something, that if you get to the point where you look at your hands and you conclude that you are dreaming,
Right.
stay cool, and I mean super cool.
Oh, I do.
Because usually what happens when most people realize they're dreaming, you have this upsurge of joy. And you know what intense emotion does?
Jerks you
Wakes
back.
you up.
Then you wake up.
And then you go, oh my God, 4-letter word, right?
Oh, I have too much fun in my dreams. It's just way too much fun.
Well, we're going to let you
Okay.
go. Thank you so much for
Yes.
calling. Appreciate that so much.
God bless you.
And I would like to just add that I also have had that experience where I see myself meditating, or I feel as if I'm out of the body looking at myself, and it gives you a sense of vertigo. It's a little disconcerting, but it becomes more frequent as you do meditation and things of that nature. So I would like to go ahead and grab another call. Let's see what's going on here. Hello, Austin. You're Austin. You're on the air.
Hey, Corey.
Hey.
Hey, it's Mr. FBU.
How are you,
I'd
brother?
like to talk to you and Swami.
Sure.
One thing I find very interesting, I've had a number of dreams where I have actually been shot by guns, and this is real. This is not a joke. And actually, it is so real that when I have waken up from the dream, I actually feel the pain physically in my body. And I found that very interesting. The last time I was shot with a revolver in my head, and I woke up to a bright light and a ringing in my head. So I was wondering what type of interpretation you would make on that, because I've never talked to any psychologist or
That's
dream
life.
interpreter as far as feeling an actual physical reaction to a dream. It's very interesting. It's something that's happened to me numerous times in the past. I was shot in the back with an Uzi, and I woke up and my back was stinging. It's something very weird going on there. But I want to listen to your interpretation of that, and I'll let you go.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay. FBU is your name?
Yes, it is.
There's actually 3 possibilities here. One is a past life experience, if it's like just one kind of experience, or 2 maybe. But an Uzi is a pretty modern machine gun. And another possibility, which is a future event, so make sure that you're not heading in that direction, because you will attract to you events that you allow your mind to dwell on. So if you think positively and you're very spiritual in your outlook, I don't think you'll experience something like that in the future. But the third possibility is much more to do with your spiritual training. Although you will find some books saying that only masters can do this, it's not true. You can find yourself in the body of somebody else while they're experiencing this, being shot with an Uzi.
Okay, let's grab this last call quickly and see what... Hello, caller. You're going to be the last
Thank you.
caller.
How you doing?
Good.
Quick questions.
Sure.
Quick answers. Swami, who, in your opinion, was Jesus Christ?
That's a loaded question, but Jesus Christ was a fully enlightened master and is part of the Godhead, but as we all are. The difference is that he had finished his spiritual path in a previous life and came back to help us. The Indians will give a name to that kind of person. They call them avatars. If you're coming from a religious direction, we're going to end up arguing about this because most Christians don't admit that there might be anybody else like Jesus. And that's an argument which isn't worth getting involved in. It's a matter of belief. If you choose to believe it, I respect that belief. But that is my personal belief on that, is that Jesus is around. You can, rather than arguing about him, let us attune with him. And you can have a conversation with Jesus. I have had the presence of Jesus in my meditation. I've also had the Buddha and my own spiritual master, Swami Shivananda. You see, the God is everywhere in everything. That means what it says. It doesn't mean that there's a little piece of God that we can call Jesus that's separate from everything else. I doubt very much if Jesus ever taught that. You see? So when he talks about love, that's what he means, love. But the answer to a question like that really is worth experiencing within yourself in meditation. Then you'll know it to be true.
Okay, thanks a lot, Austin. I'd like to thank you for allowing us into your homes. I'd like to thank the Swami for coming on as a guest. I'd like to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I'd like to also thank Donna for helping to navigate this evening. The show should be ending pretty quick. Yep.